more interesting.
This is it. So how are we keeping, sir?
I'm grand now, to be honest with you. This is going to be an interesting experience. I've never done anything like this on a
I've done something similar to
in
this.
this way.
Not for a 7-hour session. Now this is a new one on me.
Are you doing this for 7 hours, Martin?
It's running
You're
all day.
kidding, for 7 hours? Oh my goodness!
Yes. So 15 distilleries, 18 whiskies, and it's starting at 12 o'clock.
Oh, that's rough. Now.
And you get to open it.
Yeah, well, that's good now, I'm glad I'm not in your shoes, I'll tell you that for nothing.
Well, there's no finer man to open it. Guys, for anyone who's listening, I want to welcome you to the introduction to Irish whiskey, which is day 4 of Belfast Whiskey Week. We are today, you just may have heard there, obviously, if you bought the box, you'll know you have 2 packs. We have 2 packs of whiskey and miniatures, and we get to start off with one of the finest people in Irish whiskey, and that's Mr. Kieran Mulgrew. So we're starting with the Quiet Man. Now, tell us a little bit about the Quiet Man. Tell us the story of it, the history of it, briefly, and let people know what it's all about.
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank Paul for organising the event. It's strange that it takes a Scottish fella to come over here and give us a kick up the backside in Belfast to get our own whiskey festival going. So it's always great to have that. And I enjoyed last year's, although we were down in a bar in the centre of town last year, which was a bit more fun than being stuck in your own house. But such is life. So just to put it into perspective, Martin, like you, I mean, I have been in this business my whole life. I grew up, my father was a barman, had a bar on the Grosvenor Road in Belfast, and I grew up working in that. And then when I left left university, I worked for Guinness as a trainee sales rep in the mid-80s, and then have always been involved in this industry. And at Niche Drinks, we have always manufactured Irish cream liqueurs. The business started in 1983, although I didn't arrive in it until 1998, so 22 years ago. And at that stage, we produced Irish cream liqueur, and one of the key ingredients was Bushmills whiskey. So Bushmills wasn't as successful in the late 90s as it is now. At one stage, we were taking 3% of their annual output just to put into our Irish cream liqueur. And we were exporting that all over the world. And eventually I began to think, look, why couldn't we keep some of this whiskey that we're buying from different people and mature it and see what happens? So at that stage, the business was owned by Kerry Group, who are a huge Irish PLC. I think after the power company, they must be the next biggest Irish PLC after the electricity company down south. And they were really a food ingredients business, and they decided to sell it. And myself and 2 other guys who worked there at the time bought it. And the world is very different now than it was then, because you could borrow money a whole lot easier then, So once we borrowed, that was 2006, and we decided that we would try and get ourselves into the whiskey business. But first we had to pay back a lot of debt, and that took us a long time. So it wasn't until really early 2008 we began buying whiskey deliberately to cask and keep for ourselves. So we don't distill any whiskey, Martin.
No.
And that's one of the things I've been nervous with Paul about. You don't want to give the wrong impression to people and mislead people into thinking that you distill things, because the guys who've invested in the distilleries deserve the kudos for that. We went down that road in Derry. Actually, but I'll come to that part of the story if anybody's interested in it later, but we didn't proceed. But so all the whiskey that we have, we would buy in 19,000 litre tankers straight from the stills in one of 4 different distilleries that we buy from. And what we do then is we cask it, we mature it, we blend it, and we bottle it. So it's the old-fashioned bonder is what we would do.
And nothing wrong with this.
So when I decided 15, and we had at that stage whiskey that was mature enough for 8-year-old, and we also had whiskey which was 4-year-old, which we used as a blend. Yeah. And so we started the Quiet Man. This is our 8-year-old single malt. And the first thing is, why did I call it the Quiet Man? Well, on the back of it here, I'll just read out what it says. My father was a bartender. We had to say that for American purposes. Yeah. Over here, he'd be a barman for over 50 years. And sometimes he'd bring me in to work with him. And I grew up loving the sounds of laughter and the crack and the smell of the beer and the whiskey, especially the whiskey. And now that I'm blending and bottling my own whiskey, I'm naming it after my father. And 50 years as a bartender, he saw a lot of things and he heard a lot of stories. But like all good bartenders, he was good to his code and he told no tales. John Mulgrew, the Quiet Man, or as they say in the Irish, Anfiar Ciúin.
Now, quick interjection here. How often are you asked, is it named after the film?
Actually, to be honest with you, it's guys your age and mine who ask that question.
Showing our age.
Yeah. People younger than us don't tend to know what the film is, you know. Although I grew up, like everybody in Ireland, I grew up watching it, you know.
Everybody loved it.
And so whenever it came to registering the name, I was very surprised that the name was available, you know. But anyway, we registered it. I think we registered it in something around 2014, just to get ourselves ready. And so we kicked off then, and we did our first bottlings in 2015, and they were of the blend and the 8-year-old. And then after that, we added a 12-year-old and then a 12-year-old sherry. And we have done for different markets sherry finishes and some wine finishes and some stout finishes. But from a business point of view, they are difficult things to do. From a whiskey connoisseur's point of view, it's great because you get something that's very unusual. But if you're in manufacturing, Martin, as you will know, what you want is to produce the same thing, to produce as much of it as possible and not to change the production line. So consistency is what is important, because otherwise you produce one single cask worth of something. The labels cost you 5 times as much as an ordinary label. You know, you only manage to get 180 cases out of it. And no matter who says they're going to take all 180, you always end up with 11 or 12 that you're stuck with. For whiskey connoisseurs, it's great. For a producer, it's a pain in the ass.
Absolutely. Customers just don't know what they're going to get. And for a connoisseur, that's a great thing. For the guy who's walking into the supermarket to pick it up, it's absolutely the wrong thing, you know.
It is. But by the same token, sometimes it's nice that it's interesting. You know, whenever we're bottling things that are different, there's always a bit of an excitement about it. I always love it when we bottle the sherry finish. You know, you go down and you take the first release of the smell when you take the bung out, and all of a sudden that smell and aroma is everywhere. It's fantastic. You know, it's my favorite day, or when we do that.
And I think your Quiet Man, it's got that very sort of light, typical Irish feel to it. So I still have some of the sherry cask 12-year-old here, and it really takes it on board. It really it makes it zing. There's lots of sherry cask. I tried obviously a totally different Lefroy, and it just didn't work for me. That sort of light sweetness that comes through on your 12-year-old is really, really good, really good.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to the Lefroy. I'm not sure anything that's got any kind of peated quality translates into sherry. You know, you're going with two different taste sensations there, which I wouldn't be madly keen on, you know.
No, I don't. As I say, because the Quiet Man is very light, it's very approachable. And to be fair, the likes of the 8-year-old, the single malt, I mean, it's very reasonably priced. You know, at its price point, you know.
It is, and you know, when you're starting out and you don't have any distribution, and obviously if you don't have distribution, you don't have sales. And the first thing that you want to do is to become sustainable. That's your first priority, because if you don't become sustainable, nothing else matters. And so before we bottled any whiskey, the economics of it meant that we had 8-year-old, 7-year-old, 6, 5, 4, all the way down to new fill already in cask. So before we bottled anything, we had over £2 million worth of whiskey maturing, and that just kicked off, you know, and that's a huge commitment, you know, for a couple of individuals. That's a big commitment, and that's why I would have great admiration for everybody who's gone and has built facilities. It's tremendous to see it, and they've taken enormous risk, and they deserve to do well at it. And I think it's why people like ourselves who bond have to be clear that that's what they do, rather than try and pretend that they're something that they're not. You know,
there is an element of this happening in the industry. We'll not dwell on that too much. But you did mention there about building a distillery. Now, you mentioned earlier on that you were going to touch on this. I know there was plans to build a distillery, and then they were taken back. And why did that happen?
Well, it's an unfortunate story where real life intersects with what you want to do. So, Lord, we found a site in Ebrington Square in Derry, which was fantastic.
Beautiful place.
We had the full design done. We got full planning permission. We bought the stills. The stills were actually from Frilly in Germany, and they were in Derry, ready for installation. And I wasn't feeling terribly well. And between the swings and the roundabouts, I found out I had cancer, and I had quite severe cancer. And it was very difficult for us to secure funding on the basis that banks will lend you money, but they want it back. And if your prognosis isn't good, they get a little nervy. And that's natural. You know, that's the fact of life. So we had to stop that project, and it was very unfortunate. But on the plus side, you know, I'm actually still here a couple of years later, and that bit's going well, you know.
But I guess all the rest of it feels an insignificance.
It kind of does, to be honest with you. So we ended up, we didn't proceed with building the distillery, and we sold the stills to someone else here in Ireland who had been a friend for a long time. And from that point of view, at least the equipment didn't go to fall into rack and ruin. However, the site which we had and all the plans which we had just didn't come to fruition. And it cost a lot of money for us at the time, but you know, real life, as I say, just interfered, and we weren't able to do it. You know,
with circumstances like that, it's perfectly. That is life, and your wealth or your health is much more important than that project.
You know, so maybe at some point in the future, you know, we might go back to that. But not at the minute. You know, if you look at the amount of people who have built facilities here in Ireland, and particularly, I would tend to distinguish between the PLCs who are well funded and have done brilliantly in terms of moving the category forward and are fantastic for that. But if you take the guys who've come in and who have been entrepreneurial and who have built facilities, people like Shane down in Ecklandville, who has fantastic facilities, or at Short Cross, you know, or Gareth and Copeland's, and all people like that, you know, they have taken a big risk, and you have to admire them for it. But it must be difficult now for people with no income from visitor centres and things like that. And I think pricing is going to get harder to sustain for independent distillers. Whenever there's a crisis, people tend to fall back on brands that they know. So it makes things a little harder from a couple of perspectives, you know. Yeah.
Now, we'll go on to a bit more fun, because the guys will be wondering where this is coming in. So what is it we have in the bottle?
Well, the first one I was going to go with is the blend. Now, this is a blend of 80% Irish grain whiskey with 20% Irish malt. And the whiskey is 4 years old by the time we bottle it. Now, the first thing to look at is the colour.
Yep.
Now, we would chill filter our whiskey. For those who maybe don't know what that is, it's just a process whereby we take impurities out of the liquid and try and give the liquid that kind of brightness that you would associate with most whiskies. And there are an awful lot of fabulous whiskies which don't chill filter, and the whiskey just looks a little duller, but on the palate, they're fantastic. And I really don't feel that there's a difference on the palate between chill filtered whiskey and non-chill filtered whiskey, to be honest with you. So the first thing I would say is the color. Hopefully you'll get a nice kind of bright gold color, but it is going to be light. Now on the nose, it's very subjective. Every time I do tastings, my opinion is no more valid than the next person's. And the last time I was tasting down at the airport, some lady told me that it smelled of toast. And if it smells of toast to her, that I don't mind. But to me, it doesn't. To me,
No.
I get kind of spicy notes and a little bit of citrus underneath that.
I always get with this a very light, almost like a marmalade, like a very light
I think
marmalade.
that's citrus, to be honest with you. The marmalade note, I think, comes through more on our 12 than on our blend. Then if you go to the taste, now the first thing I hope you notice is that it's not harsh.
No.
If you're drinking whiskey or any kind of alcohol and you're drinking it at 40% ABV, quite often all you get is a dose of ethanol, and it's hard to taste anything from that. We, as I say, don't distill the whiskey, but we blended it, and we brought in a good blender who had worked in Glenmorangie specifically to get something that was light. And we wanted to have a profile that was something which was an easy introduction to Irish whiskey and to the quiet man.
And for the purposes of today, an introduction to Irish whiskey, this is really very much a signature of Irish whiskey, that light, fresh, easy drinking, clean, very approachable whiskey. And that's what the typical Irish whiskey is. That's what they were always known for. I mean, Derry has a wonderful tradition of distilling and whiskey. I mean, the Watt Distillery down there was absolutely enormous. They have 2 distilleries and a fantastic heritage, which I think Derry, I know the plans you had was to have for the centenary of the closing of the Watt Distillery was, I know that was the sort of lead where you were open, and unfortunately it didn't come to that session. But I mean, it's great that you have this tradition, this story of in the city, and you're bringing it back again, and keeping it that traditional sort of Irish taste,
Yeah, I mean, before the advent of prohibition and the difficulties that the Irish whiskey category got into, at the end of the 19th century, Derry was the biggest whiskey producing city in the world. It's hard to believe that, but the volume was enormous.
And the plans that Watt had for the whole thing were enormous too. I mean, he was a true visionary. Unfortunately, whenever things got sorry, he basically up sticks and went to England and closed the distilleries. But
there's a great story about that, Martin.
Oh yes, I know the story, but if you would care to tell it, feel free.
The distillery employees, the men in the distillery, because it was all men in those days in the distillery, and they went on strike, and they wanted an extra 3D. This is in the old money. Now, they wanted an extra 3D, not per hour, not even per day. They wanted it per week, and he refused to give it to them. And they went on a lockout. And so the distillery went dark, and the workers were outside the gates protesting. And he came along, Watts came along in a Rolls Royce, no less, to rub everybody's noses in it. And he got out of it, and he stood on the back of a trailer. And he said, "Will you go back? Will you open the gates?" And the workers said no. And he said, "Closed it is, and closed it shall remain." And he got down, he got into his car, drove away, and never came back. And the
That's it. And I heard that it wasn't just a Rolls Royce. I've heard a story that it was actually a gold painted Rolls Royce.
Now that may be an embellishment. The next time I tell it, it'll be a gold painted Rolls Royce. So.
It's not what you would call.
But if you consider the distillery at that stage covered 7 acres of the water side. You know,
Yeah,
that's an enormous amount of territory.
the only real remnant of it is the white building on Distillery Lane, just as we would be coming into the city on the left hand side. That's really
Yeah.
all that's left. But I mean, it was such a huge operation that when it all closed, I mean, these workers being put out obviously had a huge impact on the city at the time, you know. And I love the story of the fire that they had.
You look at people between those who were growing barley for it, those who were coopering the wood, those who had facilities rented out for the maturation, let alone those who, in a very manual process in those days, the hundreds who worked at the facility. Nowadays, you can run a distillery with 2 or 3 people and good computer PLC control systems. But in those days, it was much, much more manual, and people were crawling in underneath the stills to light fires every morning to heat the stills. It was very, very different process than is the case now, you know. So it was a big blow.
It was a huge blow to the city. I think a lot of people don't realise that, you know, in 1900, nearly 2/3 of whiskey being exported from Ireland was coming out of Belfast. You know, and all of that was coming down from Derry, from Belfast distilleries, and obviously the surrounding area. But I think it was a huge when they talk of all the great industries of Belfast and Derry and so on having disappeared. They always talked about shipbuilding and you know, the tobacco works and stuff, but very rarely they ever mentioned whiskey, and it was a huge trade, huge industry.
No, there's no question about that at all. And also, there was a very incestuous relationship. A lot of the Belfast distilleries had most of their liquid produced in Derry as well, you know. So from that point of view, there was always big links between the companies.
Yeah, and I know what tried to sort of marry them up and have like a federation, and it all sort of went a bit pear-shaped for him, and for many reasons. But there's no doubting his ambition. But
no question now. You know,
you could
and then some of the Belfast,
you could doubt his taste in a gold Rolls Royce, but sure. So I want to ask you, what's in the pipeline? What can we expect from Quiet Man? Is there anything new coming, or are we just staying sort of where we are?
There are, as I said earlier, 2 ways to look at it. The connoisseur's point of view is you want as many new and limited editions as you're after. I'm in the business end of things, and from my point of view, we have settled on 4 SKUs which we want to have permanently, and then we will do and those SKUs are the blend, which we've just been tasting, the 8-year-old, which we'll move on to, our 12-year-old, and our 12-year-old sherry. And then for different markets, we will do special finishes on the basis that the distributor in those markets takes it all. You know, so we have beer finishes which we have sent to the Far East, and we have wine finishes which we have sent to different markets in Europe, and we will continue to repeat those things. But I do think from a management point of view, it's very easy to let your portfolio extend and extend and extend, and there's nothing more exciting than producing a new product. But you've got to try and remember that you have a lot of people employed that you need to keep employed, which means you need to keep a sustainability about things. So we would be focusing on trying to be sustainable in the 4 main SKUs, and then doing things, specials aside from those. So big consumer shows that we would go to, for instance, we would do a special cask bottling for it, the likes of the BBC Good Food shows in the UK, or some of the trade shows in the US, or the Dublin Whiskey Show, for instance. But the core will always be within the blend, the 8-year-old, the 12, and the 12 sherry.
Do you want to go and taste the next one?
Yep. The next one now is our... whoops, I've just been given a questionnaire there.
No, it's number 19. So it's number 1 and number 19. I've been given a questionnaire. So do it later.
I'm going to click do it later.
Do it later. So for anybody in the box, it's number 19. Okay.
Now, number 19 is our 8-year-old single malt, which hopefully you can see. Now, this is matured in ex-bourbon casks. All of the 8-year-old that we are going through at the moment has been matured in casks which we have got from Sazerac, from the Buffalo Trace Distillery. We had produced cream liqueur for Sazerac for many, many years, and we had taken the empty casks in return. Now, again, the colour, it's chill filtered, so the colour should be bright gold.
Yep.
But because it's single malt as opposed to a mixture of grain and malt, you're going to get a big difference on the nose and on the flavour profile on the palate. Now, I get, again, a kind of fruitiness with this.
Yep. Again.
And spicy notes, almost vanilla for me.
I get lots of vanilla off this. I always have done. It's got a more of a jammy type note rather than the citrus necessarily. It's a sort of richer flavour to it.
Yeah, I think that's just a function of the liquid being in contact with the wood for twice as long, to be honest. Yeah. Now, on the palate, you get almost a creaminess there, a creamy, sweet vanilla taste.
Yeah.
This product has done really well for us, and double gold at the San Francisco Whiskey Awards and the China Whiskey Awards, Irish Whiskey of the Year when we first bottled it in 2015.
Well,
and it always wins awards for us.
Well, I really like the 8-year-old because if I'm being totally blunt, I think the blend is really approachable, really easy drinking, but your single malt, 8 years old single malt, it's not much more expensive than the blend, and yet I find it much more complex, obviously. So if I was buying another two, I would put the extra couple of £, which is really all the difference is in pricing, and buy the 8-year-old. This would be it's light. This is more complex, and for that complexity, for really not much more price wise, I think that's the option to go with.
We've a great, nice story about that one. We were at the Edinburgh Whiskey Show. It's 3 or 4 years ago now, and one of the things that they do at Edinburgh is they do a blind tasting, and everybody puts up a liquid and they taste it and they give out dram of the day, and it's one of the Whiskey Live events. And so anyway, we submitted the 8-year-old single malt, and lo and behold, whenever the judges did the voting, and they had all those fabulous Scottish malts. It was the Quiet Man 8-year-old single malt was the dram of the day. So it was an Irish whiskey one, the dram of the day in the Edinburgh Whiskey Show, which I took great relish in rubbing in all those Scottish guys.
I can't imagine. I would. I can see you smiling, which I often see.
Pleased,
But I often see you smiling because I said this at the start. You're one of the nicest guys in Irish whiskey, and that's not to disparage anybody else, but you're one of the most friendly, approachable, nice guys. Certainly, whenever I first came down to meet you a few years ago now, you couldn't have been nicer, and I want to thank you for that because it meant a lot.
Not at all, Mark. Not at all.
Now, I'm going to have to say bye-bye.
Okay. Well, look, you deserve some sort of medal for endurance now. I'm glad I'm talking to you now.
We haven't finished. This is we've started, but we haven't finished. But thanks for joining us, Kieran, and
all the best.
Wonderful day, and hope continued success. Okay.
Thank you very much. Very on, Mark. All the best. Bye.
Bye. I hope.